Hi, and welcome to Module 3 of the Competent Risk Manager course. Hopefully you've got a good understanding of scanning now and where the risks are going to come from and how they could all fit together. Now we're going to start looking at some of the techniques for fitting the whole thing together. In this module, we're going to have a look at the overall risk profile of a program and how you might analyze that. We're going to look at heat maps and the value that they provide in doing the analysis and understanding how things fit together. Chain reactions are a very important concept. We're going to work through one of those models, and we want to have a little talk about leadership attitudes as well. We talked about biases, and we'll touch on them again, but actually the approach that is set and the tone that is set by either yourselves or the program sponsor or SRO is going to be critical to how effective you are in managing risk. I'd like to introduce you to this little model that we came across by some guys called Den Heer and De Veer a few years ago. We found it really useful to help explain to a particular client why they were having so much trouble with some of their programs. The model itself is really around analysing the complexity of a technology change. As you can see, the four corners are novelty, have you done it before? Pace, is it breakneck, are you doing it really quick? Complexity, how complex is the underpinning technology and the resilience of the stuff that you're changing? And the newness of the technology itself and how much experience have you got with it. Now, the programs we were looking at the time were technology based, but we adapted this slightly to help explain to them that the one we were looking at in particular, where they were going to an extreme of complexity of technology, they were going to an extreme of newness of technology for them because they were using quite a lot of old systems. The whole thing was new to them and they were trying to do it at breakneck speed, and basically they couldn't cope with the speed. But when you looked at the program, the only way of reducing risk was either redesigning the technology or slowing the thing down and being more reasonable with what they could cope with. And we create a slight evolution of this for that purpose. So when we're looking at the risk profile of a program, there are two things that we have concluded that contribute to the overall risk. Firstly, there's complexity, which we've already explained, and secondly, the scale. Now, when people are looking at high-risk programs and big programs, they tend to focus more on scale than complexity. So scale is normally driven by cost and time and all that, and people say that's a big program. No, but actually, those programs can be big, expensive, but relatively straightforward. Okay, so we've created some more dynamic on this. So when we're looking at the overall complexity, we're kind of using the ones from the Den Heer, De Veer model. All right, so we're looking at novelty. Have you done it before? Technology, is this new? Do you have experience? And more importantly, does the market have experience? Because you could be bringing people in who know about it. I mean, you could be a program director or a program manager. You could have been brought in because you know about that technology. But how new is that technology to the organization you're working with? We've made a slight twist to one of the points on that model, which is process complexity. Yeah, so how big a change are you delivering in this organization? The wider it goes, the more riskier it gets. So if you're delivering change within one business area or one division, that might be bad enough. But if you're delivering a pan-organizational change, it gets the scale of risk goes up. And also if you start reaching into other organizations and supply chains and all that kind of stuff. And then of course, ultimately there's pace, the speed with which you're doing it. The faster you go, the more the pace picks up. However, you do want momentum, so you don't want to dawdle. All right. Now, the other bit that we've plugged into this to recognize the reality of organizations and the fact that they see big numbered programs as the high risk ones is what we've called scale. So we talk about in there, we factor in the cost. How much is this whole thing? Once you start running into millions and billions, Yeah, it all gets a bit scarier numbers. But the other areas that we look at are time scale. Now, how long is this program going to run for? Because programs that run for a long time, particularly transformation programs, absorb lots of organizational oxygen, and they're absorbing the attention of the organization. So quite often it may not be focusing on its business as usual. And those are the kind of things that can cause major operational problems. Capacity, does the organization have the resource? If you're looking at some of these big infrastructure programs like the nuclear sector, does the industry have the resource to cope with this level of construction, for example, or this level of technological change? And the fourth area is the structural change, which is pretty much linked to the process one in complexity. How fundamental is the change that you're delivering to the organization, the supply chain, people, outsourcing, that myriad of change that you might be delivering? The bigger the change, the higher the risk and the higher the scale. So it's not just about the money. It's not just about the big building stuff. It's how structurally different is the organization going to need to be to exploit the benefits and the capability and outcomes you're going to deliver. Okay, let's have a little look at the concept of chain reactions in the context of risk management. So we've already talked a little bit about the difference between threat, event, effect, and impact. So let's just have a little look at if you're involved in a construction project, or maybe let's just talk about the Nightingale case study. So the threat could be local authority planning rejection. Now, what could be the event that would cause that? And yeah, there's a myriad of events, isn't there? Yeah, we could have resident resistance, poor building design, department overload, a whole myriad of events that could cause that. But we've got to remember there's a threat. Now, you might be able to manage some of those events. Yeah, you might actually be able to make sure you have a good building design, that you have that local knowledge. But there are things, the events outside your control that you may not be able to deal with. Planning department overload. Government might change its policy. You know, think about all the issues to do with cladding over the last few years in the UK, and the problems that that's caused. So if we can take any one of those and take it to the next stage. So let's just look at, we've designed a poor building. What's the effect of that going to be on us? Yeah, what's the effect? We're going to have to go back. We could be in contract disputes. We could lose time, all sorts of things. So you can see that this risk, this threat of planning rejection is built from a sequence of events, and each one of those events has different impacts, all right, as we're coming through there. And ultimately, has different effects, but they aggregate up to create increased costs, patient service degradation in the case of the hospital, and overall late delivery. Now, when you're looking at the risk associated with this, we need to think about each event. How can we mitigate that event? How can we reduce the chances of that's happening? Maybe we can get rid of it completely. And then look at the events. Do we need countermeasures to deal with this? How do we mitigate the overall impact? So that's what we mean about chain reaction. And in the course, you'll see that a few times coming up. Following on from the risk chain reaction, we have the concept of the risk heat map. This helps us see how risks get joined together. So what we do is we create a matrix using the classic 5x5, which is popular in the risk industry. And we say, well, actually, we've got 4 categories of risk. We've got the black ones. Those are the very high, very impact. Basically, if one of those happens, our program's dead. So we need to think about that. Then we've got the red ones. Those that hang around in those could be highly likely, but not quite so damaging, or the ones that could be very damaging, not quite so likely. Then we've got the classic amber ones, the ones that are fitting in the middle. Yeah, the ones we need to actively be managing and monitoring. And then we've got what we call blue ones. Those are the ones which are not quite so damaging and we need to keep an eye on. And then we've got the green ones that are probably ones that we can kind of just check now and again. So what we can use this color coding scheme for is the regularly with which we want to check them. So your black ones, you might, if you've got one of those, you want to be checking it daily, almost, right? The red ones, you'll be checking it weekly. The amber ones, we might be wanting to check those monthly. The blue ones, maybe every quarter, and the same maybe with the green ones. All right, but it gives us some flexibility, and there's just a model with some colors in, but you can think about this, about how you want to do it in your organization. And then we can float in, and as you can see, we've picked up, what's there, about nine to 10 risks. Float in, you map them together, and then you can start to see the overall aggregated profile of risk in your program, how it all fits together. Really helpful, very good for program boards, much more useful as a reporting tool to senior managers than putting in pages and pages of risk register. Those are important for the person managing the risk across the program, but for illustrating it to leaders so they understand how it fits together, this is much more useful. Okay, let's have a little think about risk attitudes and the effect managers are going to have on the way the program runs. So we've picked out some key characteristics here that we've matched across to some animals. So number one, we've got the macho approach. Just power through. We don't have to worry about risk. We're just going to make it happen. All right. So you've probably all seen those very not high levels of risk tolerance, because maybe it's not them that's going to have to worry about it. Then we've got the opposite to that, the controlling person that wants to know every piece of detail about every risk. What's the impact of that? Well, you're going to become suffocated by risk. You're probably not going to have time to talk about anything else on your risk at your program boards. Then we got the pacifist approach. Well, let's not worry about it. It might not happen. Or we'll just keep quiet. We won't say anything about that one. I think the big danger of pacifist approach is that the right people don't know about risk at the right time. And we look at kind of some major embarrassing things like Crossrail in London, where suddenly 3 months from going live, it was going to be 2 years late. People were basically ignoring risks. Pacifist, looking at the risk going, well, nobody else is worrying about it. Why should I say anything? All right. Then we got the followers. They probably follow on from either the macho or the controller, like the wildebeest. They launch into the river, whether they're going to die or not, or lemmings could have been another one, couldn't it? Yeah, they're kind of, they're just following the way everybody else is. They're not going to challenge why you want to jump in the river. They're not going to challenge the macho and question why they're actually being so kind of risk tolerant, and they may not challenge the need for the bureaucracy being imposed by the controller. Then we've got the possum. Yeah, just changes with the way things are, kind of ducks and weaves and hopes that it's all going to work out in the end. Yeah, they're evolving and flexing as they go forward. Then we got the debater. Yeah, every time we get to risk on the register, we want to talk about it a lot. Yeah, we're going to have a talk and talk and talk and talk and talk until we finished up, used up the time, but actually we're not doing actions. We're just talking about it, right? Well, classically, I've heard this term so many times, risk watching. Yeah, nobody's actually intervening. We'll talk about the risk, but we're not actually doing anything about it. And then we've got the juggler, the person that's managing all those risks in their head. You might find this in the project managers, in the teams that are working. Are they keeping some of these risks to themselves? Yeah, are they really thinking, there's no need to tell the boss because we're going to make it work out okay. All right, so watch out for the jugglers. Finally, we're back to our biases, aren't we? We could have an optimistic bias there going, don't you know, quite often to do with a macho one, maybe. It'll be okay. Yeah, the two big ones on risk. It'll be all right on the night. The optimistic bias, it ain't going to happen. Don't bother writing it down. Make it a green, else everybody panics. We'll be fine. And probably the other one that's most important here is the planning fallacy. Yeah, just because everybody else has hit this risk doesn't mean we will. Yeah, because everybody else has failed, we're going to be okay. And the justification for that argument is we're going to be okay because it's us. No logic, just that we think it's going to be okay. All right, and again, just picking up again on the confusing correlation with causation, think about your risk triggers. The danger is that we miss the correlations, yeah, that we miss the understanding of what causes the trigger to become effective. All right, that's the worry. Those are the three that I would put out there. But of course, groupthink. Don't forget groupthink. If you've got a macho leader, we're all going to think that way. Don't forget the characteristic of the wildebeest. They're the followers. Yeah, that's the group thinkers, because you've got a strong leader who's either a controller or a stifler or a macho. Don't worry about it. Let's just dive in. Okay, so there we go. That's pretty much the key points for this video. I think it's time for you guys to go off and grab a coffee, get on with the module. Don't forget to do the exercises. In the video here, we've given you some clues on how to deal with some of those, even, dare I say it, model answers. But you go and find it out for yourself. Okay. Thank you and good luck.